yeah, I tried to, I'm sorry it came so late, but I tried to elaborate 3 distinct meaning of decontextualized. I've been using a bit loosely and they probably need different names.
Yeah, I might make a quick suggestion on that. If you're giving multiple definitions, maybe split them up into separate messages so we can chat about each, but that's just a nit. Please feel free to ignore me.
Agreeing on names for all this would actually be a useful
a glossary like we've tried for the last 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
But continually, yeah.
Well, off and on. I was telling Jonathan that we've been through the glossary, use case, modeling, and now we're rounding to use case and glossary again. And it's been a bit of a yeah, a lot of hard disagreements between Tim and I recently, but and I haven't yet had time to read all the replies because I was busy replying to Stephen.
Just to interject here, looking at the last 2 videos that I totally missed out in participation and all that, I was really happy to see that I think at alternating times, you and Stephen both knew how to defend my position, which means although we have problems with definitions, we're definitely getting an understanding because, you know, I didn't feel like most of my opinions were missing there. You guys already understood them.
Good. No, yeah, I think I do understand it. I don't always agree, but I do understand it. And I mean, there's a lot of value in it, and I agree with a lot of the goals. I believe some things are, like my last statement is very much also something I expect you to disagree with a lot. I don't know if you, because I don't think it invalidates the goal, and I don't think it invalidates the project, but it does put a different spin on how things are presented.
Yeah, I think I think the disagreement is that I feel it's, you know, as Stephen would say, a separate domain, but the debate seems to be about that it's needed in a base layer. So if we wanted to continue with that, I guess that's what we would still talk about.
Okay, Stephen's there.
Sorry, I was stuck in a debugging session.
Yeah, my last debugging session has been a nightmare. So I don't know if you had time to read what I wrote in answer to your distinction.
No.
I'm proposing another distinction, which probably we need to find new names for this because I realize I've been using decontextualized.
Before you propose something different, do you understand what I meant now or not?
Oh, totally. Okay. I think I did before, yeah. But
because yes. I think we ended where you said, well, no, they're the same, they're both interpretation. And then I said, well, they're different. And what I tried to write up is how they're different and why I think it's important.
I still think they're the same. I think one of the cases exists only as a Platonic ideal and not as a real phenomenon.
And which of the 2 cases is a Platonic ideal?
Means, actually. But it means you have to treat everything like means. Because
I don't know what that means.
Okay.
I don't think I mentioned
I wrote it down. Please read it.
I haven't had enough time to read and absorb that conversation that was happening on Slack to be able to contribute much.
It's I'll post it. I reposted the essence of it basically in Hangouts. But yeah, was there an agenda for today other than one of it could be picking up on that discussion? Another one could be.
I'm trying to think in terms of agenda. I'm going to make a generic proposal, and that's because it's Friday and I can make generic proposals, but I want to. I think we have an agreement that formalization is needed for canonicalization. We know we want to make the formalization pluggable, optional, and all that, but we still think it's useful. And I'm thinking maybe we should spend time progressing on that, because we're trying to delimitate domains in other days and say what can be separated. But I think it might be useful to advance on the layers other than the base layer, so that we have a better idea of what we're trying to separate, at least on Fridays.
So the reason I disagree is because we've never fully pinned down what the canonical is. There's still disagreement on that. We haven't pinned down what the base layer is. We haven't agreed on that, and we haven't identified different domains. So you can do that, but it's pretty much everyone coming in with their implicit assumptions and use cases on what is being modeled, whether it's useful being modeled, and we'll be stuck again where we are.
And what I'm saying is, so far our attempt to separate the domains by defining a base layer have yielded some progress in some ways, and I think it's good. But I think we're a bit stuck here, and that having a better ideas of what the other layers are will help us separate domains.
Definitely, but I don't think we do that by adding formalizations without knowing which use case the formalization support. But again, that's what I suggested to do, I guess, on Wednesday. So maybe that's not in order today on Friday.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Okay, I think actually, let me rephrase this, because I think you're making a perfectly valid point. Let's try to see what the different domains we have in mind are, besides the base domain. And I think that would be a
the
good
base domain. But
we don't agree on this one, so let's talk about the other ones, so we have a better idea of what we think of as non-base domains.
But I think Bentley pointed out very correctly, calling it base is not
I like
useful.
That. Thank you, Bentley. I was grateful for that.
So is it domain model the right term?
I think so. The domain of the problem you're trying to solve,
I think trying to agree on what problem we're trying to solve is a big part of our discussion. There's clearly a strong intersection between our different problem domains, but they're not exact overlaps, that's for sure.
Would it be useful, since Tim's back and I'm fairly new, to review what we do know as the intersection, maybe put that as a document somewhere? Because I have heard people say, for example, progressive formalization.
But that's a method which can be applied to anything. So the question is, where do you want to apply that to? I mean, it doesn't.
Right, it's kind of like curation. We all agree there should be curation, but we're not sure how.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to review what at least those are, right? Even if
the only agreement is it has to do with related. An argument graph of some sort. I think that's.
We agree on the notion of premise and conclusion, as we were discussing. We're still not sure about multi versus single premise and how we handle compounds. That is still up in the air. But we agree on the notion of premise conclusion, separating the agreeing with the premise with agreeing with the connection between the premise and conclusion. I call it argument, others call it the relevance, but we agree on separating them at least. That's part of the agreement points.
And the goal, right? We all have, I think, a similar hope to have a similar impact on society. But it doesn't mean that we have similar ways of achieving that.
Right? Yeah. But
our priorities I expressed before as well. I think we also have different priorities in what should be done first in order to achieve that.
That's correct.
Is
But,
there
but sorry, go.
the thing that I'm not sure we all understand, but I know some of us do, is that I think that, like, I think maybe Tim and I are coming at it like as well. I don't know who actually. Let's not say that. There's kind of like we want to take a quote from someone and put it in the system, and then there's another angle of coming at it to where it's like I have a concept that I want to represent in the system, and it may have some references to something. And so there's kind of like two directions of coming at it, where one, it's more tied to the concept, the context integrally, and the other one where it might have, yeah, and that's I kind of feel like is one of the areas that we have different
Also,
And there's,
ideals.
well, I heard in the previous discussions also, there's on the other side, there's also two ways of coming at it, which is,
which
you
other
know,
side?
with the interpretations you're talking about, well, there's a claim out there in some document and you want to put an interpretation in the system and discuss that. But there's another angle, which is, you know, I want in a Twitter debate or something like that, when somebody says something, I want to say, is this what you mean? Which means I want to find an existing claim in the system. And it's not the provenance of the claim. It's trying to match what somebody's saying with what is a context-free canonical claim out there. And it's like, is this your point? So, you know, it's not always I'm debating about some text out there. I'm talking with somebody and trying to pinpoint what they mean.
Well, the Twitter is text, but I agree totally. That's a real use case. We want to be able to use the system to clarify ambiguous statements in a conversation.
And also, like authors, when I'm writing, you know, I'm writing a news article, I'm writing a blog, I want to be able to say, you know, there are many people who believe this or whatever, you know, the so-and-so said that, link to the, you know, so it's like every single fact or every single claim I'm making in a document, if I can link out to a pre-existing canonical debate, just like you reference news articles or whatever, you could reference an actual claim that's been debated. It's even more valuable, I think.
Yeah, that is totally a goal. I think what we'd like to be able to say is even eventually make the claim reference to be a proxy for scholarly reference, right? Like, because in my mind, once you get at the claim on the canonical systems or the federated systems, you can navigate from there to the original scholarly articles. And this is why it's a good proxy for it, because the claim reference, yeah.
I think that's the most common use case, would be scholarly, but there might be others, right?
Yep. Journalistic.
Well, yeah, journalistic indeed. To have, I mean, there's journal like there's news websites that have started turning off comments altogether because it's pointless. It doesn't add anything. But if you can have a more focused, targeted discussion around claims in news articles as opposed to like a free for all in comment section, my idea is that would pretty much teach
also,
the general population to be more scholarly, if you will. Hopefully.
And also to use the word that Marc-Antoine has taught us, I guess, as lay people, what is it, deontic? Deontic discussions, but you know, persuasion, articles, op-eds, and things like that, which aren't journalistic. Their goal is persuasion. I always felt that persuasion rhetoric, its place was outside the canonical debate, but that doesn't eliminate the need for that type of document. And so I would hope, and this is part of my hope, that by creating something like this, persuasive argumentation becomes more anchored in quote unquote facts, or at least in what we know up to now. And so, you know, in all these different use cases, I think we would want canonical debate to be the source reference, basically.
So in all of this we agree on, and I think I agree with calling that canonical. But at the same time, when Marc-Antoine talks about it, he puts canonical and federated like in the same sentence as if it's the same thing or not, or it's a, and that's where it always gets confusing.
this is one of the points of disagreement, indeed. I'm looking at a federated system, and that way, for me, I expect two levels of canonicality. One which is contextual to a system, like, for example, Tim's canonical debate is a system and it will have its own notion of canonicality, but I expect somebody else will do another one. But what we want is for the federation to enable multiple canonicality systems or non-canonical debate platforms to be connected by claim equivalence, so that if we're on any of them, we have access to the same claim on all of them, and we can treat it as a unit, so it becomes canonical at a level higher.
I see that as losing. I see that as defeat. The moment, the way you put it, which is, okay, so Tim's system is canonical, and then we have somebody else doing their own thing somewhere else, which is exactly what I'm, all the principles.
Yeah, I know. For you, that's an anti-goal.
Try to avoid that.
For you, that's an anti-goal. For me, that's a goal.
It repeats the internet of chasing after, trying to connect dots slower than people are creating them, right?
No, but where I think
I don't get what makes it canonical anymore.
Because that's a question. Here's an answer. Because you can use the federation as a whole, and that means when you look at one version of the claim, you always have, here's the collection of all the connected claims in all the systems.
But isn't that the internet? I mean, you can do that with the internet right now. So is the internet canonical?
No, because there's no deduplication in the internet, and there's no claim.
But how is there deduplication in a system like this, where each and every person can have their own canonical form?
Because they're all connected. You have, here is the list. You're seeing this version, but here's the list of all the other versions, and here's the connections to anything that's connected to any of those versions.
Yeah, I don't see the difference with the internet.
I think one way to put it maybe is that Marc-Antoine sees the canonicality layer. I'm having trouble, but layer as being sort of, in his representation of the idea or the thing referenced, and then the symbols and all that, as the canonicality exists actually at the conceptual layer. And what you're doing is tying together its representations in different systems.
Yeah.
And I would like to see a more harder primary key, essentially, that nails it down in one place. But the canonicality is
if you
the idea.
I would go further. If you never have a strong primary key to nail it down, which for me is the claim itself decontextualized, that for me makes it canonical, because everyone sees exactly the same thing and only that thing, and that defines what it is. And we can have progressive formalizations within that, how far we can go in making that claim formalized. If you do it any other way, that you have 100 things that refer to some concept, and there's no way of making that concept canonical. Again, I don't get what canonical is at that point. Canonical is the current state of being of the entire graph of people relating claims to one another. Is that what is canonical, or?
It is. If you have, basically we're defining equivalence relation between claims, and the equivalence relations induce equivalence class, and the equivalence class is an object in and of itself, and it has contextual representations, but it can also have, it's connected to multiple contextual representations. But you have canonicality in that you can ask what's connected to this anywhere. And this is the canonicality, the fact that you're able to traverse those equivalence links.
That's not my understanding of the definition of canonicality. So
no, it isn't.
The canonicality means one of those expressions somewhere is given the status as being the canonical expression, and that so you can put something in canonical form, like in Unicode, you can have canonical. Right, there is one identifier that represents all these alternative ways of representing something. So it's a set, but there's a one-to-many mapping. They all map to one canonical form, and that can be a URL, it can be identifier, it can be And if you, I don't think you might achieve something useful by representing equivalence across, across the web, but you haven't used what you haven't achieved canonicality, at least by definition of that term, I don't think.
I agree, actually. You're right that I'm stretching the term, but here the notion is that I'm trying to achieve a kind of, let's call it meta-canonicality, but which is relying on the intra-system canonicality. It won't work well unless each member of the federation has its idea of canonicality. But I mean, Stephen, you're the one saying getting people to agree on the formalization is hard, and I agree with that. And this is why I expect actually different formalizations to enable us to do different calculated equivalences. And so we can actually benefit if we have multiple formalization systems in different systems, because each will be able to draw different machine-deduced equivalences.
Yes, but what I call canonicality, what you just described, is the common thing that all different formalizations point to. That's what I call a canonical thing. That's the thing that I'm interested in, the canonical domain.
And what I'm saying is you get the same benefit from meta-canonicality, let's say, from cross-system equivalence class of locally canonical formalizations. You get the same benefits than from global canonicality without requiring agreement on a single formalization.
But there's something that you don't get. You don't get the ability to say, here is the canonical form. Here is the handle that identifies.
Well, there's also,
that spans systems for.
Because I don't believe it's achievable. I mean, people fight over definitions all the time, right?
What does that have to do with this?
So this is a point that really, to me, is critical, and I'm trying to get at for a long time, which is one. I don't think, Stephen, what you said, I disagree with. I don't know if you intended that to be the limit, but the unique identifier of a claim is not its ID. I really want the unique identifier of a claim to be a multi, not dimensional, but a multi.
That's what I mean.
Primary key.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
That's like, also what I mean.
Right. Okay.
To be clear,
like an
Paris
IDLD.
is nice as text only is one canonical claim. Paris is nice with an attached formalized definition of Paris the city is another canonical claim. Both are canonical claims.
Right.
And whether or not you disagree with definitions, microphone, which you mentioned, is irrelevant. The point is that they both are identified by their structure and can be pointed to as a canonical claim. And whether or not they're ambiguous or not is irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant, but it's a separate discussion.
I agree with that. By the way, totally. What I'm saying is we won't stop people from. Okay, go ahead.
There's a second point which I want to make, which is the whole thing about connecting different claims and then saying they're identical. It invites new debate on every single connection, right? Not only that, but if you're connecting to one system and you're saying it's identical, you then have to connect every single argument that is contributing to that, which creates a new debate for every single one. You're creating an explosion of debates, and I don't see them as being totally productive. And more importantly, I don't see debate over definitions. And this is the point I'm trying to get in. I've got it before. I don't see debate over definitions as productive. I don't see quibbling over what was this word meant as a useful discussion. Rather, my solution to this problem is break the claim into two separate claims with two separate
canonical claims.
Well, if you have an ambiguous, let's say you have a non-disambiguated claim, right?
An ambiguous claim.
And you're saying, I think this word means that, and I think this word means that. You create two new claims, each with the definitions you want to see, and hold those debates separately, right?
Yeah, true. But then you have three claims, right?
That's fine, yes. Yes.
Are all these
We
three
all agree
stored
on all
in
this.
your domain as, and do you call all three canonical or not? Or are only two
Yeah,
of them canonical or?
So in the white paper version, the non-disambiguated claim would be incrementally improved. And so you would only have two. You'd have one that you assign a definition and you would create a second with the other definition. You wouldn't
That's
leave
exactly what I
behind.
described. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
But,
whenever
I know
there's
Stephen
disagreement
wants
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm trying to understand your definition of canonicality. That's why I'm asking. If your domain has, if your canonical domain has no room for these potentially ambiguous terms, and the only ones you allow are the ones that are further disambiguated, that's definitely not my domain. My domain, I understand, is a canonical claim. A non-fully specified claim is also canonical in the sense that it is not fully specified. If we can formalize that it's not fully specified and we can point to the not fully specified claim, that's useful. And that for me is a canonical version, which might not be useful. I can agree with that. It's highly context specific on what the claim says, but it's still a canonical claim for me.
Right. So it's missing all its primary keys, first of all, when it's not disambiguated. I consider that an incremental formalization. It's missing any primary key at that point if you have no disambiguation. And if it's not fully disambiguated.
I don't get why it doesn't have a primary key.
Because it doesn't have a business primary key. It has not been differentiated. It has nothing in it that differentiates it. You can have two Paris is nices, right? You can have Paris is nice and Paris is.
You cannot have two Paris is nices where Paris is not defined. No, that's the same canonical ambiguous claim. That's the point with it being a canonical ambiguous claim. And there's value in ambiguity in discussions because you never before you enter into a discussion know when ambiguity is problematic for the discussion.
Right. So you'd use the actual text as part of the primary key, which is weird because at some point we know that the primary key is absolutely not the text because the sentence can be represented in different ways and still have the same meaning. Right. So it's weird that when you don't apply any, it's the text that defines it. And then when you start applying disambiguation.
Is it weird or useful?
But okay, wait. I don't want to go down.
No, this is easy to solve, folks. This is easy to solve. You have the claim as text, which has a content-based identifier, which is just the hash of the text. That's it. It's no more than text. And you have
the text. You don't need a hash.
I'm not done. And then you have the formalization of it, which is based on some formal predicate logic of a given system. And in that system, you can have a version where Paris has been clearly disambiguated. And there's a version where, we don't know. So right now, Paris is ambiguous. And those are all formalized versions. And then those are formal claims. And then we assert separately, this textual claim is equivalent to this, can be interpreted as this formal claim.
Big difference.
Can be interpreted
as. Big
as.
difference.
Yep. No, absolutely. But that means that when we look at a string, we look at what are the possible interpretations. If we looked at the string first in context, we have a smaller set of plausible interpretation. If we look at it without context, we have a larger set of plausible interpretations.
Okay, but here's the point. I don't want to see debate on that text. I don't want to see debate there. I want to clarify and split. I want to have the debate about each disambiguated one and see the arguments there. I don't want to see a big mess of I thought it meant this and I thought it meant that. Stephen wants to see that, and that's where we disagree.
No, even more. I don't want to see that if it's not productive. What I'm saying is you can predict when that won't be useful, and even more if you formalize further and you attach definitions, there can still be disagreement on the definitions, on the words used in the definition. So you cannot eliminate
separate claims, right?
But the only way to uncover that is by argumentation on what you call useless claims. the usefulness of ambiguous claims and a canonical form of an ambiguous claim is exactly to identify whether or not it's too ambiguous to have a meaningful discussion.
Right.
If you don't
No,
store
I
those
agree.
in a canonical layer, then you cannot even incrementally
Which
achieve
is
what
why
you're trying to
I
achieve.
leave the job to curation to clean up behind as you go. Once you figured out there's two separate definitions here, you create the separate claims and you clean up the mess behind. But you know, this is a disagreement that is, to me, falls into the category of empirical. Like, you know, I'd be fine implementing a system that does it your way and see if it creates the mess I'm afraid
But
of.
it's
right?
not
So
empirical,
it's not,
because it comes down to the question of what do you want in a canonical claim database.
No,
For
no,
me,
no, no,
all these three claims are canonical. For you, apparently you're hinting at the end result is the canonical thing.
No, there is an empirical claim there. I see what you're saying, Stephen. There's a part that's not empirical, but there's a part that's empirical. Is it possible to avoid the disagreement on definition by splitting the definitions as early as possible? Will that humanly work? That's empirical. I doubt it.
well, no,
but that's
the
empirical.
The other part that's empirical is it beneficial or harmful to leave behind a completely ambiguous version of something that's been disambiguated, right? That is what I consider empirical. I don't want to leave it behind. I think it does more harm than good. Stephen thinks it does more good than harm, and I'd be willing to try Stephen's approach.
It depends on the claim. If you're saying if it's a claim in which case it's harmful, and yes, it would be ideal that my purpose of a canonical claim database is to indicate this is not a useful claim to have a discussion about, because it can be interpreted as many different claims, and depending on how you interpret it, you might agree or disagree.
I think that
the purpose of modeling this in a canonical layer is that identifying that.
Actually, I'll go even further. I think it's actually a primary use of the system that when we recognize in a conversation an ambiguous claim, oh, we've already found that this claim has these multiple interpretations that people might not spontaneously think about and that need disambiguation. And so it's about if we want to keep this graph of these are the possible disambiguations of this claim so that we don't have to do it over next time we read that sentence.
Right,
exactly.
No, but I'd be happy to keep the sentence as something that references a bunch of different claims. And this claim can use this sentence.
But
it's not just a sentence, it can
also
be a formalized claim. It can also be a claim with a formalized definition that's still ambiguous. That's totally possible.
Tim's question, which is valid, is when do we show this in the UX? When do we show the ambiguous claims in the UX? That's a valid question.
Well, that
and do we still attach arguments to the undisambiguated claim? Do we keep attaching arguments?
That's a valid discussion to have.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the system needs to allow arguments to be attached to the claims, regardless of whether they've been disambiguated or not. Tim.
Right.
Which we've agreed to.
I've agreed to.
We could probably document that.
Yeah. Like we could do it Stephen's way.
Did we actually agree on
Stephen's way and see if it
No, I'm just it's not about doing something one way or another. It's trying to align on what we all mean by canonical. When I say a canonical claim, for me it's a decontextualized claim you can point to, and all you need and use in order to interpret it and have a discussion about it is that representation itself. And then we can start talking about what that representation should be and how we can incrementally formalize it. But that for me is canonical. But when you're arguing, Timothy, you're arguing more and more that canonical is the outcome of a process where it's the fully formalized ones that are canonical. So
no, because you can, if you take my saying as, we start off with just a sentence, a statement, and then somebody starts adding disambiguation. I accept every step of the way that is a canonical thing, right? Is a canonical claim.
Are these two entities now? Is this one entity that's been edited? What is that here in this case?
I see it as one entity that's been edited, but we can do it a different way.
Okay.
Let me ask, I understand here. So this reminds me of the wiki disambiguation pages. It's like one for Paris, and well, interestingly, if you do a Google search for Paris, you'll get the city. But the city page will link to the Paris disambiguation page, which will link to a lot of other pages. And that's quite useful. And it's sort of a curation thing that decided that, Paris the city is probably what people meant. We still have that disambiguation page. And so if I understand correctly what will happen, so, and I think we all agree, every statement is ambiguous. And it's, you'll never get, you'll asymptotically approach, but you'll never get unambiguous claim. You'll just get attempts to take this claim and say, okay, well, this is what I really meant by this. Well, this is what I really meant by that. There's a point, I think, Tim, where you're saying so high up in the tree is a claim that is so ambiguous as to not be very useful. And
okay, wait. We've come across this before. There's a problem here in the overloading of the word ambiguous, right? Where there is non-disambiguated, which means I've just written a sentence. Mm-hmm. And there's partially disambiguated, which means I've defined what I meant by Paris, but I didn't define what I meant by is or nice, right? And so that's a partially disambiguated, right? And then there's ambiguous definitions, which is what you're kind of referring to, I think, when you say something so generic that you can't really debate it or whatever. Like my example is immigration is bad, right? But you can define what you mean by immigration and by bad, and it's fully disambiguated, but it's incredibly ambiguous in other ways, in terms of what definition you use or in, and so when I am referring to canonicality, I mean something's fully disambiguated, which means you have placed a definition on each subject or predicate or however we're going to design this. Everything's been disambiguated, and then there can still be disagreement about the meaning, and you create another claim that is canonically different because you've specified, you use a different definition or different disambiguation, right?
But I think we did say the intermediate results, that is the even purely linguistic versions with no definitions, are canonical in their own right. It's just that we can do deduplication through formalization, ideally, or through at least identifying entities. The formalization is a way to translate this sentence to a more formal representation, and that other sentence to the same formal representation, because the underlying meaning is the same. And this is how we realize that those two are connected, because they formalize to the same formal representation.
You're getting ahead of me. I'm still trying to understand what Timothy just said. So when you say you define every term, you mean even terms such as the and of, you mean, you is fully disambiguated?
I think, and this is beyond my expertise, and I was leaning on Marc-Antoine to help me figure this out. We haven't done this exercise, but a lot of times a concept matches multiple words, right? So
many to many relationships.
If you have like the Constitution, immigration is an example I use a lot. Immigration is bad, right? But there's lots of kinds of immigration, but immigration itself is a thing. But if I say undocumented immigration, I don't want to disambiguate undocumented and disambiguate immigration. I think undocumented immigration is a concept that we're trying to debate here. And so it's more complicated than a single word. But every word in a sentence should be matched to some part of the disambiguation, given that a sentence can be expressed in many ways. So those are the complications I'm working with. I don't think that the sentence is unique. I think you can have multiple sentences for the same thing. But there is a way to provide conceptually a disambiguation of each concept included in that idea.
Okay, so there's different ways of disambiguating. You could start with Paris and nice. Paris is nice, and then you could disambiguate that by saying, okay, here's another statement that is more clear. Paris, the socialite, is a nice person, and here's another one. Paris, the city, is a nice place to visit. you're just using words, no formalization. And then, and you're saying unless you're using formalization, which is sort of the mental model you gave me is sort of a markup, where now instead of a text string, you mark up a word or a pair of words, and you basically do like a hyperlink to a definition. And that more formalized disambiguation through definition is what you mean by disambiguation.
That's the idea. I think so. Yes, I agree with that.
So are you thinking though that if you disambiguate, saying Paris Hilton is nice as opposed to Paris is nice, that those are?
I think you can have one claim. You can have one claim.
Yeah.
No, you can have one claim. Like they're all the same claim. Paris is nice.
Yeah.
Paris Hilton is nice. Paris the socialite is nice. Can all be the same claim. One canonical claim that uses all three phrases, and you've attached to that claim exactly which Paris you're talking about and what you mean by nice. And that is the concept we're debating, regardless of how you phrase it. And the arguments and the proof of that is the arguments you use to support it and oppose it are the same, identical in all three cases, assuming there's no misunderstanding. Like if somebody just read Paris as nice without looking at the disambiguation, they might put wrong arguments. But as long as somebody has understood the disambiguation, the argument.
What do they look at to understand the disambiguation? So they look at
user
Paris, the
interface.
city.
I don't know the best way to design that.
So
User interface.
the concept you're referring to, the concept is always ambiguous. There's always room for misinterpretation, and that will most of the time arise out of disagreement in the argumentation. It was, oh, I didn't mean that.
Correct. But
even if the concept is, in your term, fully disambiguated. It should not arise from the sentence. It should not arise from the sentence. It should arise from the definitions you used, right? So there's that's the same. The definition you use. The definition you use is nothing more than more text. Paris is nice is a great example. You could say that Paris, the city is nice, is a more disambiguated form of Paris is nice. And I would agree.
There is a
the Paris, the city is nice. We know it's still ambiguous because there's two Parises.
Right. We have not designed disambiguation. And I agree that whatever the solution is not going to be 100% solution.
No, but what I'm trying to highlight here is that your concepts will necessarily include ambiguity. That's when I say embrace ambiguity, model it. It means that if it's not modeled, it is, we agree that that canonical form is ambiguous. It's if there's disagreement about the ambiguous part.
Yeah, that ambiguity I accept. It's the, I haven't bothered to define my terms that I don't accept, because I think that's a half-defined claim that can't be canonical because it's missing its primary keys. And so
what's the primary key? Because
to me, the primary key is a disambiguation. The primary key
it's a concept,
is the disambiguation.
But so you're giving this concept, this ideal that you hope to achieve an ID, but at the same time you're agreeing that
it's not an ideal because no, it's not an ideal because I accept that the disambiguation will itself be ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
I accept that. That is canonical. You can have a better defined version of the debate.
Yes.
That, right? So there, I would maintain the poorly defined one and the better defined one.
Okay.
It's the one that has no disambiguation whatsoever that I think is not fully formed yet. It doesn't have its primary keys.
Just checking. I think what you mean by primary key is basically the identity of the underlying entities. And a
statement in opposition.
At least an attempt.
Well, there would be, the idea is if you start identifying entities in the claim, each of those, I mean, I remember you're saying at some point, oh, we could be pointing to DBpedia or something like that, right? So we're using concept identifiers, and those I think are what you're referring to as primary keys. And I'm checking that, but it seems right.
But a set of identifiers couldn't uniquely identify
No, it doesn't. It's not
that it has
enough.
to be an expression, right?
Well,
like
that's actually,
Paris
Jonathan.
and like Paris, John are different, right? So you can't just identify the entities to
I agree totally, but I do
to
believe
include the
that.
text.
No,
Then, but sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I think that it is a layer of progressive formalization. Identifying entities gives us, narrows the scope of identical sentences. It's perfectly conceivable that two different sentences with different meaning will use the same entities, but if you just look at the sentences with those exact entities, you already have a much narrower number of sentences to look at. So it's not canonical yet. You need formalization to be canonical, but I think it's a very useful intermediate step because it allows, when you're thinking of cross-system equivalence, you cannot expect people to agree on the formalization itself. And creating mapping between full formalization is hard, but creating mapping between entities is comparatively easier.
So the model Stephen has in mind is more generalized in that it allows this process of saying, okay, here's a more clear, clear version of this statement to happen without formalization. Just going from Paris is nice to Paris is nice, and I'm talking about that
pure linguistic disambiguation.
Right, that text, it's a tiny step forward. I think, Tim, what you're saying is that is a very limited use unless you have at least the first step towards formalization by defining terms. That's not very useful. And Stephen is saying, I think that's still useful, and that adding the ability to define terms is optional.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on it, it's not useful once somebody's done the work to fully disambiguate. It's not useful to maintain it after you've disambiguated.
It is. I would even disagree there, because what determines whether or not the more ambiguous form is useful depends on the discussion and the arguments you're making. Whether or not what determines whether a more ambiguous form is useful is whether or not you agree with all the different interpretations. Take like not in all cases, and you keep bringing up Paris, a city as a person, it's totally different. But the point is, it's highly contextual whether or not it's useful to talk about this abstract, broader, ambiguous term. But what determines, generally speaking, whether or not that ambiguous term is useful is if you can use it as a premise in an argument where you can presume, that's the acceptability criteria in informal logic, that people will agree with it. Why would you make the argument overly specific and disambiguated if you actually are trying to talk about a broader abstraction? Ambiguity and abstraction can go a bit hand in hand.
I point you to the intelligence squared problem, right? Every time I watch intelligence squared, the debate is 50% about the substance and 50% I'm going to win because I'm bending the definition of the proposition to my.
I'm not saying it's always valid,
and that
Timothy. I'm saying it can be
a waste of time.
It can be. Both are. There's times when using an abstract term saves time. There's times when using a specific term is more useful. It depends on the argument you're making and the shared assumptions.
I think from a system design, Tim, we're going to have to allow that, and then our systems may not surface it. I don't like it either. I don't like people sitting down saying debate means this, and it's like there is no single definition for any word. So let's not talk about what the word means. Let's talk about what concept. And I think we're talking about concepts in our earlier designs. We did kind of have a node for this undefinable concept that all the strings, and I think disambiguated in Tim's term strings that have identifiers on the entities could then all point to. Is that still in our design? I don't think it is.
Yeah, I don't know if we even have a current design, but we were evolving there if we didn't already, if we still don't have it. We don't have it in our minimal base layer design, but we were.
And this is precisely why I was proposing moving forward on this today. It's obviously not happening today, but I'm still happy with the conversation in many ways. I think
I think there's a lot of stuff we've been needing to talk about, and canonicality is so fundamental.
Yeah, it is. Give me another example.
The name of the project.
Give me another, let me give you another example of what I mean by what I just said. The world is round, right? You're trying to tell flat Earth is, well, from outer space, we can observe the Earth is round. That's a fairly ambiguous term because we know the Earth is not round. What you might be saying is it's an oblong ellipse or whatever, as maybe, if you want to be more specific, observed by that telescope or using this instrument, this physics, whatever. You can go very specific. But can you agree that it's very useful to, in that conversation, simply to say, from outer space, we can observe the Earth is round and not go into details?
My question is it useful to keep that there when you have added a definition for the world and round? Is it useful to add that argument? Because you'd have to add that argument in two separate places now. You'd have to add, from the outer space, we can see the world as you've defined it is round as you've defined it. And then separately, you say, as we can see from space, the world is round. You've done it twice now. And have you added anything to our understanding?
Well, the reason for doing this, you use abstractions because they're useful in communication. It's much more concise to say, and my Tony is nodding, I thought you were going to say something. And Jonathan also wanted to say something, by the way. But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have some thoughts about user interface that might help if you're having that conversation. So we've all had the experience where we observe people having a conversation and we realize the conversation is useless, like intelligence squared. It's just shit show because no one knows actually what they're saying, right? And we withdraw. In a conversation on the internet, if it's clear that terms aren't defined, I withdraw. Now, if there was a system that allowed me to submit, people are arguing about Paris is nice. I realize they're talking about two different cities. Maybe they still understand it's a city. To submit a clarification, right? Even if I haven't been participating in the argument, just watching it, I can submit, and I can put it out there that look, there's two different things possibly you're saying here, and then everyone participating in that conversation can, if they don't see that there's a problem, and a lot of people won't, they can go on with the conversation. But other people that realize, oh, aha, yes, we would need to define the premise, the claim here, can shift to one of those new definitions. And what will have happened often is you will have already done a lot of work, submitted a lot of arguments, saying why, Paris, the city, is great. And then if someone shifts over to Paris, the person, those arguments are no longer valid. But if someone says Paris, and by that we mean the city, is kind of really what you meant, then what, and I've been thinking about how to make this work, I'm not quite sure, but then you want all your arguments to kind of like break, you want to graft those arguments onto that.
Yeah. So that's a curation action that I think I actually talked about in the white paper too, which is when you split a claim into two claims, or when you add a disambiguation and you haven't maintained the previous one, that's
when you add a distinction,
the arguments are still there. Yeah, when it's the same, in my opinion, debate still going on. But when you split into two separate definitions, shall we say, then the person doing the splitting essentially has a moment to make a decision of, are these arguments still applicable in both cases? Or you leave it, you do a full copy, and then you let people re-vote on the relevance, and some will kind of still be there, but be invisible or whatever, because they're not relevant to this definition. There's another concept we've been playing with, which we haven't, I'm not sure clear how it'll work given our disambiguation implementation, but there's a relationship between claims that we call general to specific. And in this case, it might be siblings, where the immigration example, immigration is good. Undocumented immigration is good, and so on and so forth. They're connected because
refugees,
it's essentially immigration is good if it increases the economy, if it improves the economy, right? So there's ifs in there. And so you create more specific versions of the debate, but every time you add an argument, there's a question of, is this argument also relevant to all the other interconnected claims? So there would need to be a mechanism to help you maintain that, as you've stated, that problem, which is, yeah, they're close enough still that a lot of the arguments are still going to be needed in both places.
And so we have talked a lot about these, and I think all of these are relevant, but I think this drifts away from the topic we were talking about, and actually wanted to answer the question you asked, Timothy, which was like, is it useful to have these two separate and then replicate all the arguments? And I would say, yes. The point is that the abstraction is useful because you can disagree on the concrete cases. You can disagree on what the exact definition of a round earth is. And what's going to happen is, if you can't come to an agreement on what a round earth is,
why not just maintain that connection via the sentence?
Which
they
connection?
all use the same sentence. You keep all the disambiguated versions.
Exactly, but that's what I'm suggesting. They all use the same sentence is my canonical abstraction that's not ambiguated. That is it. That is my canonical same sentence. And that's why it's useful.
Okay,
that abstraction is the one that is useful in that discussion.
That's not a claim as I've defined it in the model, because that sentence can apply to multiple claims, right? That sentence is used by multiple claims.
Forget for a bit about which model we're considering. Consider the argument I'm making. I'm arguing why it's useful to have abstract, non-disambiguated claims that are more productive to use as premises than the more concrete versions.
No, I accept
okay, so you don't accept
it's useful to have a sentence, an abstract reuse sentence connected to all these things. But I don't consider that a claim, and I wouldn't want people applying arguments to that sentence when you have disambiguated claims that say the exact same thing.
Yeah, but you have 10 different ones. You have 10 different definitions of round.
One second. For me, when we speak about progressive formalization, what it means is that even if nobody's done the work of attaching definitions to a pure sentence, a pure linguistic sentence, it should still be possible to add arguments to it. So that way, I do disagree with that last statement. And
no, I agree with that.
Because then you accept it's a claim. If I can make arguments about it, then it's a claim, even in sentence form, even before disambiguated, before formalized.
And I think that's the point. It has little value. The world is round is clear enough as a string that adding formal definitions may just put people off practically. People are going to have useful arguments about the world is round. The argument, you can see it from space, is perfectly valid no matter what no matter what interpretation you put on it.
Acceptable to a lot of people in a lot of discussions. That's my point. It's a useful abstraction.
Yeah.
Hence, it's a useful.
And then somebody puts a snide argument that no, the Earth is a spherical blah blah blah.
But that's a valid argument. That's a valid argument. But it's irrelevant to the.
It's a valid time-wasting argument.
No, it's irrelevant
then you
to the
create a
context
version
of
that is the Earth is a spheroidal blah blah blah, and you prove that without having linguistic games involved, and you point to the people who say the Earth is flat and say, no, it's been proven the Earth is a spheroidal blah blah blah. Right?
It's irrelevant in the context when it's being used.
But it only happens when some jerk comes and like, if you get
those jerks are there. Those jerks are there.
And so then the process says, okay, then we do the progressive formalization as it becomes necessary.
Right, but then do we need to maintain the sentence, the world is round, or do we need to maintain the debate as a separate thing with that sentence? You know, you can look up the Earth as a spheroid, blah, blah, blah. It can be expressed as the world is round and solve that problem. Or you can keep holding that stupid debate. Right?
Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is keeping the sentence is what avoids the debate up to a point. Or
exactly.
I understand what you're saying about you don't want the argument to be about definitions. But what I'm saying is absolute single source canonicality just means that the debate will happen at the curation level. And this is why but more important than that, let's forget that argument. One thing
I have a hard stop now. Unfortunately, I have my other meeting's already started, so I got to go.
Okay.
But it's been good, and I'd like to continue. So
I think I'll write up this disagreement because I think it's relevant and a different understanding of canonicality, and that's one we have to solve.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. Good.
No, this was productive.
Yeah. All right, good to meet you, Tim.
Just one
Any
quick
closing
note, though.
remarks?
Let me make one quick note. I think about halfway through this meeting, we agreed the system needs to support it. So I think we could move all these discussions to next year. Or, sometime in the future and focus on.
We're still
things that
talking
are-
past each other when we say canonical.
Well, no,
or even
right, but we
claim.
didn't talk
Timothy
about
even at
what
some
was-
point claimed that
right.
that's not a claim.
But the point
Like-
wasn't, but the point was still, are we gonna allow people, Tim was still focused on, are we gonna allow people to debate a claim pre the formalization or pre-curation? And the main thing was, well, the system has to allow it. We could still clarify what we mean. I think the other points that were in there were good, but I think the thrust of the conversation, I just think we wasted a lot of time rehashing something that we know we need to handle.
But there was a lot
That's
of
a nit.
progress. I'm happy in the sense that I think we need to, and I really want to go back on when I speak of federation, I know I'm raising a lot of heckles, but debate platforms are more and more prevalent. We need to be able to take claims and arguments in other argument platforms and connect them. So the cross-system equivalence class, I don't think is optional. Whether we hope to become the one ring to rule them all, which for me is an anti-goal, frankly, but it's a goal at the meta level. It's an anti-goal at direct level, but a goal at the meta level, because I want to be able to treat all those systems as one, though I don't expect to have a centralized version of everything. But that's
centralized of what? Because I agree, you need to be able to connect them to each other.
Yeah, and that
I just look at that really, as a different domain.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't want to have the domain discussion now. I'm not saying it's, well, for me it's central. Whether it's based or not is totally irrelevant, but for me it's central. And that means we'll be dealing with people who have different identifiers for the same concepts, or sometimes different identifiers for different combinations of concepts or different abstractions. That's fine. And more important, we need to be able to say this thing which has been canonicalized for us according to this mechanism has been canonicalized this other way with this other identifier, this other system. We need to talk across that. Now, I totally believe in the value of multiple ways to formalize, like Tim's idea of just doing entity identification, I think is woefully inadequate, but it's useful. And Stephen, again, thank you for convincing me it was perfectly useful in its own right, because it enables us to have useful interoperability, even if we don't agree on the full formalization. And that is a huge thing, being able to say, well,
and we need to find a similar mechanism for claims, not only for arguments. What is a similar underlying thing you can agree on for claims? I think that's part of the question. What is that canonical thing you're pointing to? Because if you're not pointing to the same thing and you can interpret it in whichever way, it removes the usefulness of calling it canonical.
No, but what I'm saying is, we're speaking about signatures, right?
Yeah.
And the question is,
IDs,
yeah. But ID is ambiguous because ID could be an arbitrary primary key ID in a database, right? But we're speaking about signatures.
It's a technical interpretation of it, and you assign a unique ID to something because it conveys the identity of that whole thing.
Because
equality.
It can be interpreted as. So,
yes.
So I prefer signature in this case. I think it's less ambiguous.
Yes, fine.
The point I'm trying to make is, I think signatures are also a form of language. And so there will be levels of how much we disambiguate with partially formalized signatures, or even as fully as we know how at a given point, but that's still never absolute. We get the relation of this, what I call the interpretation relation, like this is less ambiguous than that. This is a more well-defined reformulation of that. That's
well-defined is something different than less ambiguous. They're two different things. That's the comment I left.
I'm saying there's a common abstraction I'm trying to, and I'm
Okay,
sorry, there may be distinctions, but please try to understand the common abstraction.
Bye-bye.
What? Oh, you have to go. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Common abstraction is that there's a link between them.
No, it's more than that. It's there's, it can be interpreted as this is a reformulation which is subject to less ambiguity.
Yes, agreed.
That's the link I'm trying to make. And some of these are between linguistic forms, and some of these are between linguistic and formalized form. And there's multiple formalized forms, as you pointed out. And I may find, like, for example, there's a form where I just give the keys of the component entities. That's a form. It's not, it doesn't fully determine the meaning of the sentence, but it's still a signature. It's not a unique signature. There, I grant you that totally, but it's more of a signature. And then you can be more precise with a signature where you go full higher order predicate logic with quantifiers and variable identification between different predicates if necessary, yada, 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 which is absolutely useful, and you get a much better signature that way, and you get to use various logical tricks to make that canonical, because and go through the equivalence and take this normal form and that normal form to make sure that the signature is unique, which is fine. But I'm saying the process of saying this simple signature of having just the entity identifiers, which is not unique. And then you can say, well, a less ambiguous version of that goes full propositional calculus on this. It's, again,
define less ambiguous.
The same definition I just used. I'm trying to say there's
because
there's a same
less ambiguous
there's something that's common to all I'm saying. Try to understand what I'm turning around.
Okay.
it's
a more precise signature, yes.
Something that is an interpretation of something else which has less ambiguity.
Yes.
And in the case of, for example, in the case if you are speaking about the difference between simple entity signature and predicate signature, predicate logic signature, less ambiguity can mean, for example, disambiguating between a sentence and its negation, which will not be done with a simple entity signature, right? Entity signature is not a very good signature because it does not even know about negation.
I don't get why you're getting into negation all of a sudden. Are you saying that negation is a more...
I'm illustrating something.
A more precise version of it? I don't get it.
Okay. If I say Paris is nice, and I just identify Paris in a certain definition of niceness, and I point to a Wikidata identifier for Paris and some definition of nice according to some criterion, again, Wikidata value, okay? So I've got two Wikidata values, and I'm saying this is less ambiguous than the original. And then I have the sentence, Paris is not nice. Yeah. And then the entity signature is the same. I
don't know. Are you talking about Paris is not nice that points to the same Wikidata of Paris and nice?
Yes.
Okay.
And the signature would be the same, but the meaning would be different. So
which
in this
signature?
Case,
are you saying that the not is not part of the signature anymore? So only Paris and nice is part of the signature?
Well, that's what we were speaking of when we said, here's the set of the primary keys of the entities identified. What kind of, when Tim speaks of primary keys, I think that's what he means. Let's identify the thing. Now, there is the not in the text, but I'm saying if we have a signature in terms of just identified Wikidata identifiers, set of Wikidata identifiers, and order it arbitrarily to make it more, to normalize it, This, for example, will not, it's not fully distinguishing because the not will be dropped in that case. So that's a kind of
So it's
signature.
interesting. What was implicit in all of this is that you're saying that the original text is not part of the signature, right? I was assuming it was, but you're saying it isn't.
That's a good question, actually. I'm saying there's a way to compose the signature without the text. There's also a way to compose a signature which would have the text and the wiki identifiers. That's fine too. Those are different signatures. The problem,
I'm just wondering what you would say then. You would say signature Paris, signature nice is a more precise term of the text. Paris is not nice. Is that then the operation you would be doing?
I'm saying it would still be part of the, okay, if I go Paris is nice and Paris is not nice, and I have the versions where I've done entity identification, and I have two entity identification versions, of course, they would keep the text. The question is, in my signature computation, do I keep the text or do I just use the entity?
I'm saying, of course, otherwise,
well,
you're landing into the issues you're explaining right now.
No, I don't see it as an issue. I'm saying a signature defines an equivalence class. Now, some equivalence class are too coarse, for example, not distinguishing negation is very coarse, but that doesn't mean it's useless. It's useless for certain purposes. It's useful for certain purposes.
Okay,
if you started all this
to say that there's a common, because we were totally sidetracked here.
You start all this by saying is less ambiguous, and then you wanted to move on to the next point. So maybe you should do that.
Yeah,
like what is the common abstraction there? So now you're talking great length about it's less ambiguous, okay, and signatures, and okay, let's assume for now that the text does not have to be included in that. That's a separate discussion. I think we can shelve that for now.
We are getting
why were you getting at this?
My point is that the disambiguation relation can work within system for different formalization, and it can work across systems, and it will have to work across systems because we want to talk to other systems, and it's the same mechanism. The mechanism of saying this is equivalent to that or a less ambiguous version of that can be interpreted as
it's the same mechanism as saying this is meant to be interpreted like that, which the author agrees with.
Yep.
Okay.
It's an ordering relation.
I'll read your reply. Maybe I'll understand it better because I don't see it.
I'm saying it's an ordering relation. It kind of imposes a relation between all sentences, which can be either within system or cross system. And the fact that some sentences are maybe purely formal and drop their form, or mix the linguistic and non-linguistic form, or are purely linguistic.
My point is that the relation is entirely different. That what
My
you
point
say
is
has a common abstraction. I don't see the common abstraction. I don't understand it. So if you can somehow formalize that more, like written out in detail in text in a shortish fashion.
Fair enough.
The reason we agreed both are claims, and I formalized them in claim form, and obviously these two claims are not the same claims. So if you can somehow show what the common abstraction is of these claims or what you're trying to say in one form or another, that's not a full book. Because I simply don't see it, how you can treat these the same. For me, they're entirely different relations.
Okay, well, I'm saying can be understood as, can be interpreted as, and there's of course a symmetric and asymmetric version of that.
Can be and is meant to be interpreted as a.
Yeah, meant to be. That's in French we say procès d'intention. It's presuming the intention of the person. Exactly. I don't believe we ever know that. Can be interpreted as is the only thing I recognize.
Until the author, as I described in Hangout, agrees with it.
Yeah, and I'm saying, and the author may be dead, and the author may not be clear about what they meant, and
yeah, but that's why I call a canonical claim disambiguous. If the author meant the ambiguous claim, that's fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
but okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to read your reply. I have some continued debugging to do, unfortunately, before the football game later. That's going to be fun.
Okay.
Okay, so there's, I think we
I have
highlight a
homework.
couple of points of central disagreements. I would really like to have some form of agreement at some point on what canonical is, or just have no agreement and use different terms. Canonical.
Yeah, I agree totally. I agree totally. We are clarifying different definitions of signature and canonical, and
exactly.
We are doing important distinctions now. I think this is useful. I'm very happy with what's happening. Like, for example, I just defined 3 different ways of what I meant by this decontextualized. And I think that was very useful for me. I don't know if you found it useful, but
it is useful to see that we just at some point also need to converge again, right, on some concepts, and then we can later still agree whether or not they're useful. But if for now we have the same understanding of some concepts, it will make the discussions hopefully easier.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again as usual for today. See you next time.
All the best.
Tuesday.
Ciao.
Bye.